Congressman Dennis Kucinich of Ohio has always done things a little differently. Instead of making the rounds at the Labor Day barbecues in New Hampshire or Iowa, the Democratic presidential candidate spent the week in the Middle East, where he met separately with the presidents of Syria and Lebanon. Why did Kucinich opt for Damascus over Des Moines? Here to tell us in his first interview since he returned last night, Congressman Dennis Kucinich of Ohio. Congressman, thanks for coming on.
Tucker, how are you?
I'm great, and the one thing, I disapprove of many things you've said and done, but one thing I admire is your constant attempt to call attention to the fact there are a lot of Christians living in Syria and Lebanon, a lot of Arab Christians, and their plight is important, and you've done a lot to call attention to that, so thank you for doing that. I'm wondering if you brought that up during your conversations with the president of Syria. Did you mention that the Syrian government treats Christians like second-class citizens?
You know, I'm having trouble hearing you on this, but I think I know what you asked. In my discussions with the president of Syria, we talked about everything. And I think it's important to know that in my discussions with the president of Syria and with the president of Lebanon, there's a great deal of interest in peace and stability in the region. And I think that the United States must do more to show a new direction. And the direction that I've been talking about, Tucker, is strength through peace, direct engagement, open dialogue, diplomacy, adherence to international law. Leaders in the region, I believe, are ready for that approach, and we had some meaningful discussions as to the approach that might be taken towards peace in the region, which, frankly, is central to everything the United States is involved in.
Well, Congressman, from the transcript of remarks, and I believe they're accurate, that you made in Syria, you're quoted as attacking the United States over the Iraq war, which has, of course, caused all these refugees to pour into Syria. Were you uncomfortable attacking your own country in the presence of one of its sworn enemies?
Well, the fact of the matter is that Syria has taken in over 1.5 million Iraqi refugees. And they did it without qualification. They have been providing health services, feeding people, taking care of people who were fleeing, literally fleeing for their lives. Now, my wife and I actually went into the areas where great masses of refugees were living on the outskirts of Damascus. I've never seen anything like it in my life. This teeming mass of humanity, people crying out for help, having only the clothes on their back. And it's meaningful, I think, that the president of Syria was willing to provide that refuge for the people fleeing the war in Iraq.
But I mean, I wonder, Congressman, if you recognize that your presence there would be used for propaganda purposes by the government of Syria. The government of Syria is bad. Can we agree on that? It sponsors terror. It sponsors the problems that we have seen in Lebanon for the past 20 years. It's a sworn enemy of Israel and the United States. I mean, Syria is not a good government. Can we agree on that?
Well, you know, I don't embrace any nation's foreign policy wholesale, but I do want to see for myself. The president of Iraq did not ask me to go see the refugees. I asked to see the refugees. Okay, I asked about the refugee situation. Right. And I also, Tucker, if I may, I also asked the president of Iran about a wide range of issues that related to the Baker-Hamilton report, where Baker-Hamilton recommended that Syria and Iran be engaged as a means of resolving difficulties in the region. Okay,
that's great, Congressman. I'm just, to have more credibility, it strikes me it's important for you to acknowledge that Syria has been behind the destabilization of Lebanon, for instance, and that it has sponsored terror, and you haven't acknowledged that, will you?
Well, listen, it's not a secret that Syria had soldiers in Lebanon for a long, long time, and that Lebanon, in order to gain its own sense of independence from that control, finally was able to get the Syrian army to leave Lebanon. That was mandatory for the autonomy of Syria and for Syria's sovereignty. At the same time, the president of Syria recognizes that he's got to have stability in all the nations on his border. And as a matter of fact, the doctrine that I'm talking about, Tucker, strength through peace, is a means of stabilizing the Middle East and of addressing the issues relating to the Palestinians and the Israelis, Iraq, Iran.
Did you talk to the Israelis,
Lebanon.
Congressman? I know that you say the Syrians desperately want peace with Israel. Have you talked to the Israelis about that? And have you been to Israel to talk to them about that recently?
Listen, on the last trip I made, I went to Israel to talk exactly about that. You know, I hope to meet with the Israeli ambassador soon to talk about a follow-up visit to Israel. I mean, I feel that America must take an even-handed approach in the region. And the only way you do that, strength through peace, is direct involvement, is to talking to people, is not to drawing a caricature of other countries. I mean, Israel suffered greatly. There's an existential threat that's deeply perceived. Israel wants peace. The Palestinians' rights have to be regarded in order to achieve that. Their economic, social rights. I've been to Palestine, I've been to Israel, I've been to Syria, I've been to Lebanon. I think anyone who wants to be president of the United States must be familiar with the region and must be ready to talk. How do you get to peace? And so strength through peace is the approach that I've been talking about, and it really turns on its head, Tucker, that neoconservative doctrine that's led to a disaster. Unilateralism,
peace through strength. You mean the idea that won the Cold War? I think it's worked pretty well.
That what?
The peace through strength, the idea that won the Cold War, I think it's worked pretty well. Unfortunately...
Well, actually, when you look at where we are today, First Strike took us into Iraq. And First Strike has proven to be a major disaster. You cannot, no nation can any longer act as though it's a nation above nations. In order to achieve real security, and I would not hesitate to defend this country, but in order to achieve real security, we have to come together with people, some of whom we may not like, in order to find a common ground so that we can work towards peace. That's why I went there.
Congressman, we're out of time, but I appreciate your coming on. I do. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tucker.